In the research methods section of the exam, you'll get given a stimulus that you need to read through carefully because all of the questions in the research methods section will be based on the stimulus. So the stimulus will give you lots of clues as to how to answer the rest of the questions. One of the first things you need to think of as you're reading the stimulus is, what is the research method? And by that it means, how has the researcher done their investigation? What methods has the researcher used? So you'll know the methods as experiment, correlation, observation, self-report, meta-analysis, case study, and content analysis. For AS, you don't need to know the content analysis or the case study. So once you've established what your research method is, then you can start thinking automatically about other clues. So if it was an experiment, then you would start thinking about it being a test of difference, which means you're going to have an independent and a dependent variable. Then you might think about what's the experimental method, which could be laboratory, natural, field, or quasi. And also you'll need to think of what the experimental design is, which could be independent groups, repeated measures, or matched pairs. If it's a correlation, then you'll know that means it's a test of association. So you'll be looking for the relationship between two covariables, and that could be a positive or a negative relationship. You'll also need to keep in mind that if you're asked to write a hypothesis, it will be a correlational hypothesis, not an experimental one. So something like, there is a relationship between, and then you'd say the covariables. If you're asked to draw a graph, then you'd be drawing a scattergram if it was a correlation. And you might be asked to interpret a correlation coefficient. So if it was minus 0.77, that's showing you the minus tells you it's a negative correlation, and the 0.77 tells you that's a strong relationship. So the more of one thing, the less of another, but the actual correlation coefficient sign will tell you the strength and the direction of that correlation. If it's an observation, then you'd need to think about the type of observation. Is it controlled or naturalistic, overt, covert, participant, non-participant? You'd be thinking about the behavioural categories and that they are operationalised. You'd have to think of the sampling technique you would use to gather your data, so you might do event sampling or time sampling. You'd also be considering the reliability of the data, so we could use intra-observer or test-retest. If it's self-report, then that's talking about questionnaires and interviews, and the questionnaires could have open or closed questions or filler questions, any of which you could be asked to write or interpret. If it's an interview, then you'd need to think about it being structured or unstructured. You'd think about the type of data that you're going to generate, which could be quantitative or qualitative. And also you'd be thinking about issues with self-report like social desirability, poor recall, and privacy. So when you first look at your stimulus, think about what is the research method? How do we investigate? And once you know how we investigate, that is going to give you lots more clues.